Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of our unit on PC hardware for the 7th grade. Alright, so if you haven't had a chance to check out part 1 of this video series, I highly recommend that you check it out because today we're diving a little bit deeper into the internal components of the computer. Alright, so let's get started, okay? Here we go. I have found out that when I was in sales, okay, and one of the things that I did when one of my first sales jobs was to sell computers. And one of the biggest obstacles to overcome was to try to show people the value of something to get them to understand why they needed a certain PC with certain features to do what they wanted to do. Unfortunately, these computer users weren't really familiar with technology and lingo. So I had to devise a way to communicate the importance of computers, because they would often stand around going, "Oh yeah, I understand the specs," and they would be like, no, right? So I had to figure out a way to do this, right? So I came up with a system, and I said, well, let's put up a system that the customers would understand, these professional customers, and show them how they relate to the parts of a computer. So I decided to think of an office. Now think about what an office has, right? An office has things that we relate to and we're familiar with, right? An office, you have maybe a desk, you have a chair. Usually you'll have a worker working, right? You'll have a phone line. Maybe you'll have some lights, right? You'll have some storage cabinets and what have you, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at a typical office and see if we can figure out how these components might be similar to the internal components of a PC. In other words, how they operate, all right? So here we go. All right, so there you go. As you can see here, we have some lights, okay? And there's no worker here, but you can see where the worker would be working, right? As soon as you turn the computer on, the worker kind of appears there, right? You got a desk space for operating, right? You got a little bit of storage here, a lot of storage out there, so on and so forth, right? But there is some way to communicate, convey ideas, and what have you, okay? Typical office, right? So how does this relate to the parts of a computer? Well, you could think of the person who would be working here, right, as the CPU, okay? We're going to find out what CPU means here shortly, but it is not an abbreviation for computer, okay? So the CPU is the worker, okay? All right, we're going to go into a little more details here shortly on that, all right? So the CPU does all the work in the office, right? He does the acting, not the thinking, because this CPU, this worker, isn't very smart. He only does what he's told to do, right? He doesn't think for himself, doesn't make his own decisions. He says, okay, I'm going to do this, okay? Oh, you want this? I'm going to do it, okay? So there you go, okay? He's the worker, or she's the worker, the CPU. It's the worker, right? Then you have places to store things, right? We talked about the hard disk drive and storage devices, right? Or flash media devices that store things, okay? Well, think of the bookcase kind of like where you reference materials that have been stored and saved and instructions, okay? Kind of like that bookcase in the back there. Then you have various working devices, right? Maybe like a telephone, right? Telephone only does one thing. It knows to make calls, that sort of thing, right? But you might have a set of instructions that are to be read only, not changed. Some other instructions might be changeable depending on what's going on, right? You also have a workspace for the worker to do their actions, right? Now, would you say that if the workspace is bigger, that the worker can do more things at once? That might be something to think about, right? And of course, you need a way to communicate with the outside world, which is what the phone system does, right? So we're going to hear these terms: CPU, Central Processing Unit, right? We got storage devices. We're going to talk about hard disk drives, solid state drives. We're going to look at what read-only memory is, which is ROM, read-only memory. We're going to look at random access memory, at least in terms of system memory. And then, of course, the network interface card or the phone. And, of course, the workers got to see what they're doing, so they need some lights. Now, if you're saying, well, Mr. C, they got lights out the window, I get it. Let's pretend it's completely dark, no light is getting in there, and that thing is covered, and there is no window, all right? Worker can't see anything without the lights, all right? So let's dive deeper into these concepts here. All right, so more vocabulary. Yay, vocabulary. All right, here we go. All right. So the hard disk drive, okay, HDD, all right, this is older technology, right? It stores and writes information, right? It keeps, houses, and stores information on magnetic plates that spin. Okay, so these plates right here are spinning really fast, right? Sometimes as much as 10,000 RPM, maybe 5,400 RPM or 7,200 RPM, depending on the make or in the model, okay? But they're spinning really, really fast, okay? And information is stored on these highly magnetic plates. Well, that's cool, right? See this little thingy right there? Okay, that is the read-write arm. As it's going and as it's reading the information or writing the information, that arm is just steadily ticking back and forth, reading the data and the information that it's on there, right? And there are multiple plates that are in there. Lots of moving parts, right? That might be a problem, okay? Now you also have solid state drive, okay? These are similar to a hard disk drive in the way that they store information, but they don't use any moving components. They don't have nothing that spins. There's not a read-write arm that moves back and forth. And so it does so on electrical current. Basically, it's a big version of this thing, right? A big version of a flash drive. Now, the cool thing is that there are no moving parts in this thing, right? So if it doesn't have moving parts, does it sound like it'd be more reliable or less reliable? If you're in my class, you're probably thinking more reliable, and you would be correct, right? This is older technology with the hard disk drive, but it tends to be a little bit less expensive, and this is newer technology. It's a little bit faster and more efficient, right? A little bit faster, more efficient than these guys, right? However, here's the thing, right? Data farms and data servers, right? They still rely on these because they are cheaper, okay, than these, okay? And there's various other reasons, but I won't get into that today, all right? But as far as somebody who wants fast, quick computing and quiet computing and reliable storage, this right here, the solid state drive, is the way to go. Now, other storage devices are the optical drive. Okay, the optical drive just sounds like that. Think about what the word optics means, right? You go to the optometrist if you're needing to get the eye doctor, right? These are optics, my glasses here, right? So optics are then anything that uses a lens, okay? So you got CD-ROM drive, or CD drives, DVD drives, Blu-ray disc drives, etc. These are internal or external devices that allow input, output, and data storage, right? Depending on the size, so on and so forth. You could have like 700 megabytes for CD, 4.7 gigabytes for some types of DVDs. Other types of DVDs hold 8.5, and then Blu-ray disc holds 25, and then they got 4K and all that kind of good stuff, which I'm not going to go into, right? Now, these aren't used as often because of the affinity with these, right? However, these still have plenty of uses in modern technology, all right? And then, of course, it's optical. These devices right here write to a medium. They need some sort of medium. In other words, something to be held on, right? And those are, of course, CDs. These are anything that reads and rides is read and written with laser. Okay? All right, so you got hard disk drive, older technology, cheaper technology, but still very useful, right? A little bit less reliable. You got solid state drive, very reliable in personal computing, okay? And they use electrical current, big versions of these. And of course, you got your CD, DVD, Blu-ray, 4K optical drives. All right, and then of course, we all know what flash media is, right? There you go. All right, so next slide here. More vocabulary. Yay, we like the vocabulary. All right, so next thing we got to do, right? We have to supply the office with power. I mean, you can't turn any lights on, and the worker can't work without power. It needs electricity, right? But computers operate on a different type of electricity than what comes into our house, okay? Computers use what they call DC power, right? Where the power coming into our house is AC power. If you're in science, you should know the difference, right? You should learn that in physical science class, right? But basically, DC is direct current, right? and AC is alternating current, okay? So two different types of power, all right? You cannot just plug your motherboard straight into the wall socket or else you'll have sparks, a fire, that kind of thing, right? So you need some way to turn that power coming into your house to useful system power. And that is accomplished with the power supply, all right? And that's usually what they look like in most inexpensive units, right? You got a little fan on there, and these little wires feed different components inside the computer. Very, very important to understand, right? Then you have the motherboard. The motherboard is the primary circuitry component of a computer. It kind of holds everything together, right? But you could also think of it like our spines, right? What do our spines do in our human bodies, right? They send signal back and forth so that we can feel what's going on, right? But they're also providing us a sense of balance and communicating with the rest of our bodies, right? And so kind of, you could think of the motherboard as the way that the worker reaches out and gets a hold of everything in the office, right? And it's kind of working with those items, right? So he's moving around, but it's really the motherboard that's making the current and making the things happen. Now, the cool thing is that the motherboard also sends power and data throughout the system. That's crazy, right? All right, so that's what they might typically look like there. And you can kind of see here, that's where the CPU would go. We're going to talk about RAM here shortly and some other devices and cards. You got your various ports up here. You got your chipsets and places where your power supply goes and what have you, right? Kind of neat there. All right, so your BIOS. What is a BIOS on a computer? Well, BIOS is read-only memory. It's memory that cannot be rewritten. It cannot be changed without forcing it to change, okay? You generally don't want to change it because if you mess up the BIOS, you've just made a brick out of your computer, right? Well, the BIOS wakes up a computer from a cold start, okay? It stands for a basic input-output system. So think of it like this, okay? Worker goes into work one day, right? Goes into an absolutely dark office, right? Has no idea where anything is at, right? Lights aren't on. He can't see anything or she can't see anything. The worker can't see anything, right? So how does the worker know where things are at? Well, you turn on the lights and it says, oh, hey, there's the desk. Hey, there's the filing cabinet. Hey, there's the telephone, right? There you go, okay? So you got to think of the BIOS as waking up the computer from the cold start, okay? Very, very important to know there, right? Now, there is what they call the CPU. Again, as I said before, CPU is not an abbreviation for computer, okay? It stands for Central Processing Unit, okay? It is the worker. I said before that the worker doesn't think on its own. It does what it's told, right? So it performs a set of instructions, okay? People will often compare the CPU to the brain of the computer. That's incorrect, okay? Because our brains are storage devices and they're control centers. But what actually makes the motions? The muscles, right? All right, so with that in mind, comparing a CPU to the brain is an over-glorified idea of what it actually can do, right? It is nothing more than a device that says, oh, you want me to do this? Okay, here you go. Here are the results. On to the next command, okay? It's a worker, okay? It's performing the functions. All right, and yeah, that's typically what they look like. Lots of little different pins and things and so on and so forth. And this says 4th generation Intel Core i7, so that's a little bit advanced processor from about just 6 years ago, all right? So, but it's still a decent little chipset there, right? What's the difference between i4 and i5 and i whatever? That's a conversation for another day, not in this unit, okay? So there you go, okay? Let's see here. Yes, the memory. We used the term a few minutes ago, read-only memory, when referring to the BIOS, right? And that's exactly what it says. It's memory built in that cannot be changed, okay? Think of this. Think of a calculator. Every time you press a number 9 on a calculator, what are you going to get? You're going to get a 9. Are you going to get a 5? No. Are you going to get a 6? If you turn it upside down, Mr. C. No, you're not going to get a 6. It's still going to be a 9, right? All right? So you hit the 9, and it's always going to be a 9, right? You hit the plus sign. What's it going to want to do? It's going to want to add whatever information you put in next to the number you just put in, right? That's an example of read-only memory. If you change what a 9 means, then it's no longer giving you a 9, right? So it kind of works like that, right? You don't change the memory. Now, you might also have random access memory. It's memory that's randomly accessed and might even be changed. Okay, so think about this, right? I once had a blank space on a computer storage device. I downloaded a song. Is that space blank anymore? Maybe not. It might be filled up with the information for that song. What if I delete that song? Then it's blank space again, right? And then maybe I download a video file. Well, there it is. It's a video file now, right? So yeah, it can be changed to whatever you need it. Is it always accessing that song in that video file? Nope, it's randomly accessed. It's used only when needed, right? So that's what random access memory does, right? And random access memory, as far as the system itself is concerned, right? You'll have a system RAM. You got storage RAM and you got system RAM. I want you to think of it like this, right? Our system RAM, which would be installed on this motherboard right here, is kind of like having a desk, right? If you have a small desk, can you do a lot of things at one time? It gets very hard to do after a while, right? But if you have a bigger desk, can you spread things out on the desk? You sure can, right? And that's what more system memory allows you to do with a computer. The more system memory you have, the more you can do at one time and the more efficiently that worker can operate for the user. Okay? All right, and there you go. That's what they kind of look like, little sticks of memory there. All right. Oh, great. Googly moogly, Mr. C. More vocabulary? Yeah. All right. All right. So there's that fancy P word we talked about in the first video. It is not peripheral. It is peripheral. Okay. Peripheral, right? And it is any device or hardware connected to the main board or the motherboard. Okay. A peripheral. All right. Right now, I'm using a microphone. It's to my right. I'm not going to move it because it's going to make a whole bunch of weird sounds on this recording, right? But this microphone is a peripheral, right? A printer would be a peripheral. Why? Because you would print that or you would connect it via some sort of port, right, on the computer. It's a peripheral. It attaches to the main device. Your keyboard and your mouse and your monitor are all peripherals. Now, if you can't remember that, think of this. What is your peripheral vision? Well, if you're thinking, well, I got my direct vision, what I could see inside of me, but my peripheral vision is everything that's kind of sort of attached. I'm not really looking at, but I kind of sort of see, right? Yeah, same concept, right? Those are peripherals, right? Anything attached to the main board, all right? So you might have additional peripherals built into the main board, or they might be coming as cards or something you can add to the main board. Those might include a network interface card, right? Network interface card allows computers to communicate with other computers, right? So you got network ports or network little cables you can plug into, right? All the desktops inside Mr. C's office are connected via a network interface card. Okay, it's built into the motherboard. Very cool, right? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a separate device, and that's cool. They both operate the same way, all right? So it allows computers to communicate with other computers. That's what they might look like if they're a separate device. You have a sound card, right? A sound card converts audio and audio data to a signal, right? So that it can be sent to a set of speakers, amplified, and turned into what we perceive as sound, right? It converts audio data into audio signal and audio signal into audio data. Well, that makes sense, right? And that's what they might look like. If they're built in, they're not going to be as fancy and as nice as that. And we'll talk about the difference between dedicated peripherals in another section if you decide to take my course in 8th grade, all right? And then, of course, you got video cards, right? Anybody who's a gamer knows that upgrading to a separate video card is one of the best way to make your computer a little faster and your video games to appear a little bit cleaner and crisper, right? Because it's using its own processor to convert that graphic information and send that out to the monitor itself, right? So it converts visual and graphic data to supply to the monitor, right? Again, sometimes they're built in, sometimes they're separate. The case is here, you have all separate cards, right? But again, they might be built into the motherboard depending on the make and the model of the device itself. All right, so that brings me to the end of this section. Here on slide A, we have a quick question about the difference between ROM and RAM. I think we covered that one. Let's see, we talked about that one, and then, here's a refresher course back to the other video. You might have to refer back to that or the PowerPoint on Google Classroom. And of course, you have here, we talked about that one. That was pretty recent. Let's see here. Very good. We also talked about that one very recently. And of course, yes, Is the brain the right thing to think of, though, there, right? You might want to make a statement about that. All right. So that brings me to the end of this lesson. We'll check you out on the next unit, and hopefully you've taken something away from PC hardware.